Hello， 大家好，歡迎參加 ADHD Awareness Week 2021嘅講座環節。我係今日講座嘅主持 Grace。今日好榮幸請到歐盟嚟嘅 Hans 成為我哋嘅嘉賓。咁我哋就有請歐盟嚟嘅 Hans 同我哋嘅觀眾打聲招呼啊。Hello Hans, good morning.
Hello Grace, good morning.
This is Grace from Hong Kong. Let's talk ADHD.
I'm happy to see you and thank you for having me. This is a wonderful opportunity to share experience. That's wonderful. So my company, since 1998, we do coaching. We are experts in people at work, especially. So some coaches, we work together with the psychiatrist. This is the psychiatrist, Akke Meiling, and we owe him a lot because he is very theoretically and very practical at the same time. And he sort of offers us ways to deal with people with ADHD, autism, bipolar, giftedness, etc. So, and we have two psychologists. She's one of them. She is a workplace or a labor psychologist, you could call it. And we work for employers via the company doctors and HRM. The company doctors refer to us and they know, oh, this is a case for Equisto because it's a bit this and a bit that, complicated, complex cases, and then they refer to us.
So can I interrupt to ask a question?
Yeah, of course. Yes, please.
Yeah. So I'm curious about because in Hong Kong, so as far as I know, there's a few or only one ADHD coach in Hong Kong. So in Netherlands, so how many coaches like you are there?
There are in the Netherlands quite a few coaches. I would say some 30. Of course, there are coaches who are really specialized in ADHD. They do there's an American organization who gives accredited training for specializing in ADHD, but only via the Dutch Association. I know some 20 people who do coaching of people with dyslexia, ADHD, etc. And then there are general coaches who coach employees or coach families, and some of them have enough or some knowledge about ADHD. So in the Netherlands, if you have ADHD, you can find a coach. Yeah. Oh, so there's always, yeah.
So do you think is the number of coaches is enough for your country?
Not yet. We are, that's why I give training course in coaching and we recommend the official ADHD training, etc. So from ADHD Europe, we are working on stimulating more coaches all over Europe. There are some other countries where there are coaches, but let's say in Iceland, I know 3. In Denmark, 4. So for the whole of Denmark, 4. That's a bit not. So it's not yet enough, but we are growing. And the education to become a coach is getting better and better and more accessible. So it's a development. So I want to share some information about coaching, especially ADHD coaching. First of all, coaching in general is a coach is a sort of extended brain and gets connected to your brain and tries to understand you in a way that you can understand yourself. So helping with questions that you come clear about how you are built, what are your weaknesses, your strong sides, etc. So that's the general coaching. A coaching trajectory in my case, there's always, most of the time at least, there's always an employer and an employee. Then something happens. The employer has questions about the relation between employer and employee, and the employee may be broke, sick, dysfunctioning or whatever. Then the employer contacts us and we try to make this triangle relation. We coach the employee, but we sort of also coach the employer. The employee is the focus, but the employer is the environment. So then the coaching process means we hope to repair the relation and to help the employee to get back on track. Then the coach can disappear. So that's in general what we do. And coaching trajectory in the way Equisto does it is a limited time, 9 to 12 months, 12 max, then a limited budget. At the start, you make a plan and say what it's going to cost. The average price is around 4,500, some 5,000, some a bit less when it's less problems at hand. Average 15 to 18 coaching sessions, and then including or extra sessions where the psychiatrists or one of the psychologists comes in and you talk the 3 of them. There's always at the start the aims the employer has with this budget. The employer pays, let's say, €4,000, And the employer has an aim with that, a goal. What do we want to achieve? That's always explicitly written down. And the issues that the employee wants to work on. The wording here is very strictly chosen. If you're an employee and there is something the matter, you are going to work on it, not the coach. You are working, you are developing, and the coach supports you. The coach is leading during the whole trajectory, and the coach works integral. Integral means anything can be at the table, not only your ADHD, but maybe also the relation with your partner, relation with colleagues, your performance, the content of your work, whatever. And so we also include the environment. So that's in general the coaching approach of Equisto. And now for ADHD coaching, an important thing is a coach who is trained in ADHD or maybe autism, etc., but has a training in special brains, will be able to recognize these ADHD symptoms, but will also be able to explain them, for a start, to the employee, him or herself, but for a part also to the employer, to the manager or the HR. Most of the time it's the manager who comes in. And because if you know that people with ADHD function better in crisis situations, sometimes they are a crisis mechanic or a crisis manager or an ambulance nurse, or things like that. That's very good, that's a quality. But like I told you, you also have to support them not to overdo it, not to go over the top and then get ill from exhausting. Okay, all these symptoms or properties of ADHD can be looked at as a positive way and a negative way. Swerve off topic, so talking about one thing and another and another and another, and then keep on talking and everybody loses track, is of course a burden. It's a little handicap, but it's also a symptom of the dreamy brain and the fantasy they have. So you can use it in a certain way when there is need to think outside the box, because inside the box we didn't find the solution. So now we have to go outside the box, and that's what they're good at. And what a coach does is explain the brain. That's how I call it. Explain, this is your ADHD. And if a person has trouble with making choices or trouble at home throwing things away, the hoarder, the people who collect so much stuff that the whole house is overloaded, that's where a coach can help also. Here in a working environment, interrupting people when they talk can be a burden, but you have to know what it is. And people with ADHD interrupt because otherwise they forget what they were to say. And that's, a coach can here make a difference between gifted people also interrupt you, but they interrupt you because they already know what you're going to say. And if you ask a person, okay, you interrupt people when they talk, why do you interrupt them? And a person with ADHD will answer, oh, otherwise I forget what I want to say. That's one of the diagnostic criteria to detect, is this a person with ADHD? A coach can also address and help you, support you with procrastination, as I told you. Some people with ADHD call themselves, I'm a last minute junk. They do everything at the last minute, the evening before, or a deadline junk. We now know, and a good coach can explain that the last minute crisis-like situation increases the noradrenaline and dopamine level in the brain. So then they function very good. Their brain is more capable of producing, let's say, a PowerPoint presentation or a letter or an email or etc. So if you really understand that, then the coach can support you how to overcome that and organize your work in another way. But a coach can start with explaining it to you, and then most of the time people themselves come up with solutions. So explain the brain is what the coach does. The coach also talks about the prospective memory and forgetfulness. Prospective memory is remembering the things you have to do. It's not the memory of what did we do last year, or how old am I, or where do I live, or whatever, but it's remembering what you have to do. So the things to do memory. They tend to be very forgetfulness in that. And this is also something to be coaching about. All this kind of things, first step may be that medication helps for these symptoms. like they tend to act first and think afterwards. Medication can help you to take a moment to think and then act.
Mhm.
And a coach can help you how you can do that. There are the coaching tools. First, what I said is the first and most important coaching tool is in the psychologists call it psychoeducation, and I call it explain the brain.
Mhm.
So my client tells me about a certain behavior. Yesterday in the meeting, I did this and that and this and that, and then I tell him, this is your ADHD part.
Mm.
Like for instance, emotional regulation. When they tell me about, well, and I was so mad and I've hammered the table and throw the door, close the door, etc. Well, that's the ADHD emotional control. And that might be an opening to enhance the medication, increase medication, or do something else. But the first thing to do is to tell them this part of your behavior is connected to your ADHD. Other parts are connected to your intelligence, that you're a woman or a man, that you are a skilled trainer or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then explaining that ADHD has something to do with self-control and emotional regulation. There comes the function of coaching is creating a helicopter view, mm-hmm. looking at yourself while operating your daily behavior. That's a very important thing. So talking with a coach about, I do this and then I did that and then she said such and so and I said such and so, and then the coach will take you in a helicopter, say, look at your own behavior, see the ADHD part, see the other parts, and that will help you to gain more self-control. Mm-hmm. One of the coaching tools is to explain to people with ADHD, especially, the use of a power nap. A power nap is a 20 to 25, not more, 25 minutes short, sort of not sleep, but relaxation, half sleep. Mm-hmm. And just look on the internet, power nap. As long as you remember, if you have serious sleeping problems during the night, don't use power nap. But if you are more or less standard in sleeping problems, then the power nap will help you to self-control, to better focus, etc. Mm-hmm. And there are even, maybe for bigger and wealthy, rich companies, power nap cabins, and you can install them and people can book them for half an hour. Mm-hmm. You go in, 5 minutes, lay down, and then 20 to 25 minutes. If you're not used to it, you have to set a timer. I'm used to it, so I don't have to set a timer. I can do a power nap everywhere. Mm-hmm. So that's, of course, training. It's a very good means to create a bit of peacefulness in your brain. Mm-hmm. But there is a lot of more. There are all sorts of coaching tools that a coach, I already talked about job carving, but sometimes we help people with organizing and paying the bills at home. Mm-hmm. So the personal finance. We talk about the things to do and handling your agenda, your diary. An important thing is to train yourself, only handle it once. Mm-hmm. When you pick up a file, decide, okay, why did I pick it up? Do I want to throw it away? Do I want to phone the person who is it about? Handle it, finish it, and then file it again. So only handle it once is a very good way to deal with your ADHD for a part. Then in your diary, in your agenda, some people with ADHD have profit of compartmentalization of your week. So every morning I start with email for half an hour, close the door, handle email. Then I do a meeting. In the afternoon, I am there for complaints of questions of my colleagues, etc. So make a sort of structure in your day, your weekday, and your whole week. It will help focusing. And this is, as a coach, we help people to protocolize, to like neurotypicals do from nature. People with ADHD have to learn to see a task in a step-by-step way, as a protocol, as a movie, as a film, to work step by step. And we do train them to structurize their tasks. And we also train them to, during the day, it looks like compartmentalization, but it's a chain of habits. Let's say, do you have breakfast every morning? Yes, I do. That's standard. I don't forget to have. Okay. Your ADHD pills, your medication, put it on the place where you find your breakfast, you make your breakfast, always take them during breakfast. So the chain, the connection of certain habits. And after breakfast, you always pack your bag or whatever. So make a chain of habits visual in your mind and then execute them. So there are, for ADHD coaching, of course, it's too much to go too deep into all these different ones, but there are a lot of tools where a well-trained ADHD coach can help you to structurize your life next to medication, which also works well.
So I have a following up question about your coaching tools. Like if your client, like the employee who is refused to disclose the real situation of ADHD because of he or she may think of a conflict of interest with the employers. So how would you handle it?
What kind of conflict with the employers?
Like, for example, if the employee thinks that if I tell you that I didn't do something that my employer asked me to do, and you know it, and you may tell my employers afterwards, and then my appraisal results may be affected. So how do you avoid these situations?
Yes, of course. That's a very important task for the manager, because of course people with ADHD, they are ashamed of their failure of being late or forget something, and then they will hide it, or they will come up with excuses. And as soon as a manager that you notice that your employee is hiding things or has excuses, etc., bring it on the table and say one thing: how can I support you to overcome this problem, like postponing, procrastination, or forgetfulness? And important question: hey, John, it's your ADHD. How are you going to solve this? And do you know how we can support you? That's an open question, not an accusing question. Hey, again, you forgot it. Because then the next time, John will not be open to you. He will be afraid and will hide it and come up with excuses and etc. And that's not the way. Make it open. Stay serious. Hey, John, this is really a problem. You forgot 3 times to do this and that. Do you know that it's connected to your ADHD? Yes, I do. Okay. Are you a victim or are you responsible? How are you going to deal with it? Do you have any ideas how we can support you to deal with your forgetfulness? That's the conversation you have to have. So not accusing, be serious, make clear that it's not okay, but also offer support and have John or Mary think them for themselves. And if they can't come up the same day, they say, okay, think about it for 2 days. After the day after tomorrow, we will talk again, and you will come with solutions how we can support you to deal with your forgetfulness or your postponing or always being too late or whatever. And so you set the boundaries. This behavior is not okay, because it isn't. But also offer support. And in the end, when it doesn't work with simple talks, you may hire a coach, and a good ADHD coach, is able to also advise the manager.
So is there any bottom lines for the employees to improve the situation? Because as you said that the managers or you as a coach should give enough support to make the employee not making any excuses or continue to improve themselves. So is there any bottom line for them not to do that or make the same mistakes?
Yeah, the bottom line is, for the manager, if something happens that irritates you, then something is the matter. Don't start accusing or whatever. Bring it on the table, be clear, and offer support. And then in the end, if after 1 year someone doesn't change, sometimes you have to replace, because then after a few months, you come to the conclusion, Mary isn't in the right place. Hey, Mary, we are going to find another place for you. Or in the end, sometimes you have to fire people and help them to find another job that fits them. So it's always about the boundaries that the manager sets. This behavior is not acceptable, but we are going to support you. And if necessary, we hire a coach. And if necessary, we can make useful adjustments. And it's the quality of the manager to see, hey, we've tried this for 6 months. This isn't going to work. John needs another job, in the company or outside the company. That's just normal for everybody, not for people with ADHD only. It's for everybody. Sometimes you're in the wrong place and it won't work and you get ill or irritated or conflicts, etc. And if it isn't the right fit, every HR worker knows, look for the right fit between the job and the person. And sometimes with a little adjustment of the person, it'll fit. But sometimes a lot of adjustments of the person, it's still the wrong job.
Oh. Okay, so that means there's always an exit for the employers or employees out of the job, right?
Yeah, there's always an exit, of course. If it's not the right job, it's not the right job. But then you can support the person to find another job in the company or outside the company. And in this way, a coach can advise the manager, for example, with this kind of advices, an employee with ADHD, put him in a department where he can stand by for crisis events, in a department where certain complaints of the clients come in or other crises because people with ADHD are good in crises. Or like I told my story about how I worked in court, challenge them with a deadline. It'll help to make them hyper-focus, work very, very hard, and accomplish a lot of production. Or what others call a mission impossible, people with ADHD love it. Put them on a mission impossible and where innovation is wanted. So, and then you don't have any problems with procrastination, etc., because the job changed, you know? So that's often, it'll be a solution. And a coach has to be able to also advise the manager. Okay, this is a short introduction what ADHD coaching can be. You may have some final questions.
So overall, I have enough questions for your PowerPoint. So do you want to talk about the Hong Kong situations and also the Europe situations, or anything you want to address on? Okay.
Okay, you asked me about the European and Hong Kong situation. So sorry, I haven't been in Hong Kong yet, so I don't know much about the Hong Kong situation, but it's a very modern city of this century. So it can be compared to any other place in the world, very advanced. And I know in Europe, like I told you, we are growing coaches. We are stimulating that more coaches can support people at work, the employee as well as the employer. And there is a very good education in an institute in the United States that does it mostly online. It's called ADCA, ADDCA, and they do certified coaching trainings and educations. It lasts, I think, a whole year to do the first degree, and then you can get a master's degree also, etc. This is top of the bill in the specialized ADHD coaching. But then there are also more general coaches who do, for instance, all kinds of special brains. And it's in Europe, it's developing. And it's also, because you were also already referring to that, it's also depends on the legal labor situation. For instance, in the Netherlands, if an employee gets ill, the employer has to pay them for 2 years and has to invest in trying to reintegrate the rehabilitation and helping them to get better, offer coaching, etc. Otherwise, they have to pay them another year. But I think in Germany, it's also quite good, but then the government pays. So if the employer doesn't see the financial impulse to help the employee, of course, that can be a problem. But in the end, I would advise you to talk to real employers, so HR, company doctors, higher management. Employers are not there to fire everybody. Employers pay people to do the job. And of course, when there's no production and always being too late and then being for weeks being ill, etc. Yeah, of course, if it's legally permitted, an employer will fire you.
Yeah.
And so that's, of course, I know. And a lot of people are afraid to share that they have ADHD with their employer because they're afraid when I tell them I have ADHD, I will get fired. And they won't tell me because it's my ADHD, of course, because that's discrimination and that's prohibited all over Europe, at least. That's so as far as I know. But, and also based on the global human rights, it's already said that you cannot discriminate. But as an employee, you will lose the fight, of course. So I'm what we do is we stimulate people like HR and company doctors to understand the quality of ADHD and to make it profitable to invest in it, and not to talk about, well, you get fired, etc. It doesn't work. If we start that way, we won't proceed. And how is that in Hong Kong? How is the labor situation in Hong Kong? Do you know that?
So from my point of view, actually it's like too many root causes, and also it becomes a vicious cycle of the situation. Like, as far as I know, like for psychiatrists or clinical psychologists, that they don't have enough knowledge about ADHD because of the spectrum or the curriculum that doesn't cover too much about this topic. And it becomes like for the hospital authority that they don't have enough or clear guidelines about how people around ADHDs to handle the situations. And and on the other hand, for the commercial sectors, that unless for example, the listed companies that once they encounter the problems of ESG situations that require them to tackle the problems, otherwise they will suffer from the profit loss. Otherwise, they won't do anything on this topic regarding to the employer and ADHD employee situations. So basically, the research cycle shows that all the people around ADHD are quite ignorant, I would say, about this situation, and it moves quite slowly in Hong Kong.
Sure, and we were talking about, employer sent into the GP and get an ADHD coach and let the psychiatrist do diagnosis. But when there's no psychiatrist who can diagnose ADHD, then you have a problem. I've been looking at Hong Kong institutes where psychiatrists work and psychologists. There are, I know, I found it on the internet, but not so much. And that's the same in Europe. There are countries where psychiatrists even refuse to deal with ADHD, some. So we are working on it to get ADHD more accepted and share knowledge, train psychiatrists and train coaches to deal with ADHD, because it's a big group. It's 5% of the world population, so it needs to be addressed. And a Dutch psychiatrist called Sandra Kooi, she is organizing trainings for psychiatrists to know more about ADHD, to recognize it, to handle medication. There are guidelines in Europe. The Netherlands has a guideline for handling ADHD, guideline for psychiatrists and psychologists to handle ADHD, how to deal with it. And it's the most well-known guideline is the NICE guideline, NICE guideline. And it's an extended way how to deal with detecting, diagnosis, medication, etc. It's all written, and around this guideline you can organize, and you as an association can also do that. There are psychiatrists who would love to come to your association and talk about how can we deal with ADHD, because sometimes they just don't know. They are not against it, but they don't have the resources to be really trained, and then they get afraid and say, well, I don't know enough about ADHD, so I'm not going to deal with it. But we are working on, at least in Europe, training psychiatrists and training coaches, because that's the two you need. So we have employers, like we were talking about today, that employers see the qualities and know what to do. But then, of course, also the employer needs to have the external services. If they think, hey, this is ADHD, okay, where do we go to? Where can we refer to? And then you need psychiatrists and coaches who are at least able to address ADHD.
Right, because I think it is quite important to prove, like, for example, in Hong Kong, let's say there are 5 to 10% of working population that has ADHD. But the thing is, in like public hospitals, the psychiatrist that doesn't have enough knowledge to assess the person whether he or she has ADHD, so they rather not to diagnose that they have ADHD because they don't know how to deal with the situation. So that's why, in the results, that most of the people think that, okay, in Hong Kong, they're not a large population of having ADHD. So that's why for government, they don't have any regulations like equal employment and ordinance. There are no such cases or regulations regarding to suspectful cases. And also for the commercial sector, that they don't think there's urgent need to handle these kind of situations and don't put any resources on them.
Yeah, well, the first thing I would advise you as an association, as a non-governmental organization, is to invite psychiatrists to come in and organize a day for them, or maybe 2 days. And if you invite psychiatrists, we can take care of the enough specialists who can inform them. I do train company doctors. And we do a whole day then about what is ADHD, what is autism, how can you deal with it, how can you recognize it. Then we really go into the neurotransmitters in the brain, how the brain is built, more like how you talk to a doctor, of course. And if you invite, be it 3 or 4 psychiatrists, no problem. We will fly over or do it via Zoom or whatever, and we can train them. And there are enough specialists in the world who can tell them how to deal with ADHD, so they don't have to be afraid that they are into something they really don't understand.
Yeah.
So I challenge you to invite psychiatrists.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea.
Yeah, why not? Just approach them and say, hey, we are the owners of ADHD, and we want to talk to you about you as the person who can help us. And we have organized this and that, a congress, whatever, or a workshop, where just give it a name.
Okay, so I think it's time for us to close the conversation today.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. See you, hope to see you again.
今日好多謝 Hans 同我哋分享咗咁多關於 coaching 嘅知識，希望能夠幫到有 ADHD 嘅朋友生活得更加之好。各位觀眾，呢個講座就嚟到呢度結束啦。我哋之後仲有好多精彩嘅講座同埋工作坊，記得留意我哋嘅時間表，到時記得準時參加啦。拜拜，下次見。